So this story is one that shows up in some form or another in all four Gospels. So there aren't actually that many stories that's true of. Sometimes they show up in 2 out of 4 or 3 out of 4, but this one is in 4 out of 4. And so it's a pretty important story, but in reading all 4 accounts, I chose the Luke one in specific, but it was interesting to compare and contrast them because almost always the woman can't do anything right. That's pretty common in the Bible, unfortunately. And so we're going to be unpacking that piece of this a lot of bit. So in all 4 of the stories, this woman, sometimes she gets a name, lots of times she doesn't. This is one of the accounts where she doesn't. In John, she is identified as Mary, the sister of Lazarus, who we talked about last week. But in 3 out of 4 of them, though, she's this sinful woman. But we don't know why or how. We just know that the person with power, the Pharisee, the teacher in the synagogue, was like, oh, she's that kind of woman. It's like, oh, that kind of woman. And when I was in seminary, I was reading all of these textual criticism, and basically whenever anyone, the text doesn't actually tell us what that kind of woman is, but all of the men always thought that meant she was a sex worker, because clearly an unattached woman who has some access to means, that's probably what she did, right? Like, oh, that kind of woman. Okay, cool. So that didn't actually come from the historical record. It doesn't actually come from text. It came from one of the patristics in about 300. So this idea that Mary Magdalene, who sometimes this woman is identified as, was a sex worker, was actually used to undermine the fact that she was one of the most powerful disciples who was responsible for the expansion of Jesus' ministry. But because women have been denigrated throughout biblical history, we get that kind of woman. Thank you so much, Tertullian. And so I actually like the Luke account the best, which is why we're working with it. But the John account is also really interesting because we have Judas, who he will factor heavily next week. Again, spoiler alert, right? I know. Oh, wait, where are we in this season? What's happening? Easter's coming, what? So in the John account, the thing that Judas gets really mad about, and the John account spells out, is this alabaster jar full of ointment was worth a lot of money. And Judas is like, that money could have gone to serve the poor. And then literally in the John account, there's this little kind of side comment that's Judas didn't actually care about the poor. He wanted to steal the money himself. So literally this woman becomes this avatar of everything that we don't like, everything that even we can't own about ourselves. She's the image of. So anything that we don't like about our own internal experience, we are going to project onto that kind of woman. And it's happening here more subtly as well, right? So Simon, the Pharisee, is saying man, if this Jesus guy, was really a prophet, if he really had insight into knowing what was going on, then he wouldn't let this woman touch him. But what have we actually been exploring about Jesus' character over the last several weeks? That those people with power called untouchable, which even might damage his ritual purity, Jesus would touch them anyway. And he was always in the act of restoring and handing people back their humanity and saying, I see you as beloved, even when the rest of this system doesn't. And I don't know what guilt this woman carried. We are reading a lot into the idea that she is weeping, that she has made this act of sacrifice, probably financial sacrifice, definitely postural sacrifice, right? She's on her knees, she's weeping, she's using her hair to cleanse and dry Jesus' feet. That is a posture of deep humility, which we assume comes from a place of deep guilt. But we don't really know what moves her to be in relationship with Jesus in this way. We just know that Simon knows that she's that kind of woman, whatever that actually means. We don't actually know. But we've read this story in this way for so long, and we believe the biblical account when it says she was sinful. Well, the hermeneutics of suspicion, which comes out of black women reading the Bible and noticing who's missing, asks us who benefits from telling the story this way? Who is missing from the story? Whose voice are we not hearing? Whose perspective on the matter is missing from the way that this story is being told? And honestly, I'd really like to hear from the woman what drove her to be in relationship with Jesus in this way. Because she's been slapped with this label of sinner, and that's what Simon thinks of her, but it's not what Jesus really thinks of her. And so then we have this discrepancy in the story, and when you read the other three accounts, it becomes very clear that she is this image of everything wrong with the world. In the 12-step rooms, we have a phrase, and that is, you spot it, you got it. So if something really pisses you off about someone else, it's probably because there is something in your character, your least favorite part of yourself, that you see in the other person, but can't come to grips with in the way that you show up in the world. And that's right. Yeah, right. Many an uncomfortable conversation with my sponsor about this exact thing. Like, I really am driven crazy by that person. She goes, How about you do some introspection, Mallory? And I'm like, nope, they are wrong, they are bad. But we come back to, what is it about me that's hooking into that person, right? And so when Simon names, she's that kind of woman, what is he covering? What can't he come into relationship with about himself? And Jesus is like Johnny on the spot with that. He's like, She's showing me generosity. Maybe she's showing me gratitude. You ain't done nothing for me, and I'm supposed to be at your house for dinner, right? You basically, like, the equivalent of, you didn't give me a place to wash my hands, when I was driving, and, had gunk on my hands, and you didn't even show me where the bathroom was, right? No napkins. Nothing to scrape my boots off on, and it's, 3 feet of snow outside. Just like no hospitality. And Jesus is like, listen, she knows something about what it means to be in relationship that you're missing. She knows something about generosity and gratitude and hospitality that you should know because you have access to means and resources, but you're not actually living that way in a whole body sense of generosity and hospitality and gratitude. Jesus says, you think you got it, but you don't. And I love that. It's another little throwaway line that I think are actually some of the most telling in some scriptural passages. Like, Jesus is like, come here, I got something to say to you. I can imagine it was like, like that would be so scary. And so the question that then is before us in this story is, who have we labeled as other in order to not deal with what is going on within ourselves? If "you spot it, you got it" is true, what do we need to look at then when we're annoyed with other people? What do we feel guilty about? Because it's normal, right? It's a very normal thing to scapegoat someone else. This is a phrase that we know, right? That those people are bad over there, and I'm one of the good ones, as far over here as possible, separating ourselves from the other. But one of the deep teachings of the Christ is that of reconciliation. That he went to those on the margins, that he went and he touched those people that everyone felt was untouchable. And he said, no, you belong at the center of community. You belong at the center of our care and our consideration. That these people, when we think about the Beatitudes, the poor have something to teach us, the heartbroken have something to teach us, the guilty have something to teach us if we can be in relationship with it. Amen. And the invitation then is for those people with privilege, Simon in this story, to get down off our high horse and to see how we aren't actually that much different. It just happens to be that the worst thing I've ever done hasn't ever made the news. More fortunate, yeah, right? So this woman is a sinner. She's that kind of woman. But I wonder what was going on in Simon, what he was terrified of someone finding out. There's a lot of questions there. What are we terrified of someone finding out about us? And how does that fear, I love how Nan Merrill puts it in the call to worship, keep us from living a creative life in the arms of the beloved? One of the most powerful parts of the 12-step process is the 5th step. But it comes after the 4th step, which is writing a fearless and thorough moral inventory of myself, right? So all that introspection, who do I resent? Who am I angry at? What am I fearful about? What mistakes have I made? What grudges am I holding? All of it goes out onto a piece of paper, and I have to name it for myself. And then I go and I sit with my sponsor and I read it. And here's the worst thing I've ever done that I've never told another human being. And my sponsor literally yawned. Which was a little bit anticlimactic, right? Because I'm like, here's this giant, we were meeting at like 7 a.m., right? So you know. But she was like, basically come back when it's murder. Right? Here's this thing that I had been carrying for so long that if someone found out about, I would be that kind of woman. And not only was she not fazed, it was an ain't no thing. And the relief of being able to speak that out loud, to not carry it myself anymore, to realize that I deserved to be in relationship, and the things that were keeping me out of relationship, the things that were contributing to my problem with alcohol, the things that were contributing to all of my self-destructive behaviors, that I didn't have to carry them anymore, that I could lay them down, that I was worthy of God's love and care, and I was worthy of the care and concern of this community, whatever my community was. And then you sort of gather up that experience and say, okay, I guess I'm still likable, even if I mess up sometimes. And then you go back to the person, if you're able to, you go back to the person that you've hurt. And you say, this is what I did. What, if anything, can I do to make amends? And in my personal amends process, I can't speak for everyone's. What I found was some people didn't even remember the incident that happened. So I'd been stewing on it for 10 years. And they were like, wait, what? I'm like, oh, yeah, this thing happened. Cool. Or they said, oh, Mallory, I forgave you for that so long ago. And I was welcomed back into the family of relationship. And so I think about what Simon was not able to come into relationship with himself. Right? We don't really hear how he responded to Jesus' compare and contrast lesson, right? I hope that it broke something open for him. That he was able to see that he was not all that different than that kind of woman. Even with all of his status and all of his power and all of his learning, that he was not beyond the reach of transformation if he was courageous enough to come into relationship with the things that he felt guilty about, the things that were separating him from the rest of the human family. Because that's Jesus' invitation. To come back into relationship, to realize you're not all that different. You're created good. And you mess up sometimes. And you're still beloved. And isn't that good news? And so this is why we practice confession and assurance of grace. And I love how we've been doing it through this Lenten season. We start from grace first. That has never gone away. It's never been contingent. But just like when I was able to divulge my deepest, darkest secret to my sponsor, the weight that comes off of my shoulders to say, oh, this wall that I've built around myself, either to puff up my own understanding of my own character because I'm better than those people, whoever those people are, that kind of woman. I can tear those walls down and receive the love that is available, that we are always, always worthy of. That has never changed. Grace has always been available. It is only us hanging on to either our differences so that we can self-differentiate and say, those people over there, or our guilt, which tells us we don't belong in the family of humans, that there is no place for us because we are too wrong or too bad. The gospel is that has never been true. Love, acceptance, care, generosity, they are all your birthright. And so, beloveds, from that place, may we come into relationship with those things that keep us separate, that we may be ever more richly connected with God and with one another. Amen.